Here, a new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Uriah Heep, and I've had some requests to feature music from this legendary band, definitely pioneers of hard rock and metal. And Uriah Heep formed in London, England in 1969, and that was a year after, the historic formation of Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath in 1968. So they came on the scene a year after that, but they definitely just, exploded on the scene. Everybody was listening and checking out Uriah Heep. Definitely an essential band, and I'm stoked to finally feature this group. So if you go back and notice rock, hard rock, and metal music history, you really can't ignore Uriah Heep. They really did influence and inspire an entire generation of bands and musicians. And right alongside Zeppelin and Sabbath and Deep Purple, Uriah Heep's influence is in there too. Definitely on the bands, like the guitarists, drummers, and bassists and stuff on the scene. But then also vocalists. Freddie Mercury was inspired by Uriah Heep, King Diamond, Bruce Dickinson, Rob Halford. But here's an image with some of the bands directly influenced by Uriah Heep's music. So in the guitar department in Uriah Heep's music, we have the legendary Mick Box. And Mick is actually the only remaining original member of the band, because Uriah Heep is still active. That means Mick Box is still out there rocking the streets and on tour, which is unreal. That's great. And definitely a very influential and important guitarist, an unsung hero right here. So while putting this lesson together, I was once again overwhelmed because Uriah Heep has released over 25 studio albums, 20 live albums, 41 compilations, 33 singles. They've sold over 40 million albums worldwide. So there's a lot of music from Uriah Heep to go through. And they were very prolific back in the 70s. They were one of those bands that released like 2 albums, a year. And that went on for almost a decade. And they have a lot of music to kind of go through. So I basically went all the way back to the beginning to their first album, Very Heavy, which that's what it's known over in England. In the States, it's just known as Uriah Heep, which is on the wall right there. Over in the UK, it has that spooky kind of Crypt Keeper cover with the guy covered in cobwebs. Very heavy, very humble, very heavy, very humble. But anyway, we're going to look at some music from that album, and I kind of bounced through some other albums and kind of hit some different moments. Definitely Uriah Heep's, biggest hit, Easy Livin', is kind of an organ-led song. So that song's not going to be included in this lesson because this isn't an organ lesson, this is a guitar lesson. So I'm focused on guitar parts, guitar chords. I'm not really worried about hits. This isn't American Bandstand. This is Late Night Lesson. So if this sounds cool, buckle up, because here we go. Alright, with the opening, that was the song Real Turned On from the album Very Heavy, and the first time I heard that while I was putting this episode together, that riff just knocked my socks off. I was like, yeah, I'm totally going to add that to the lesson, because it just rocks. Something like that. So we're in the key of A right there, and we've got this super bouncy riff right there. Like that. So think A minor pentatonic right there. Kind of climbing up that G sharp back to A right there. And then right there, double stop 7 to 5 on the D and the G string. Little partial chords. And then just double, kind of repeat that riff. And just loop that over and over. eventually you hear this change. Go up to a C sharp and you got like a hit on that single C sharp note, and then a pull off right there. And then you're going to basically go to F and do the same thing. And then B right there. And then E flat right there. So that's very unusual, but I love that time period, like late 60s, early 70s, when a lot of rock bands, prog bands, early hard rock, and early heavy metal bands would take, you know, like stylistic or musical chances like that, where it may not really make sense in music theory, you know, terms, but in rock and roll terms, it sounds cool. And then just start banging out this A, C to D, you know, power chord there. And go right back to the riff. Yeah, real turned on, kicks ass. Next up's the song Walking in Your Shadow from the album Very Heavy. And once again, keep in mind, this is from 1970, right? And there's a lot of things that hadn't happened yet in rock, hard rock, and metal music. So this is really primitive in a way. And there's like a little bit of Pete Townsend, like this kind of big power chord, kind of ringing thing. So the Who, I think, definitely were an influence on Uriah Heep. But this riff kind of reminds me of Kiss and like some other like 70s rock. Keep in mind, this is before Kiss. But like this. Something like that, really basic stuff here, right? Single notes, that E and D note there. And I think it's actually two guitars doing this together, but it's forming a C5 and D5 power chord, so I just played those two notes together. But I think it's technically two guitars playing separate notes there. And you hear like a little bit of vibrato on those notes. So I just kind of shaked it. Or shook them, I guess, a little bit right there, but like that. And go into an E power chord right there. E5. Let it ring. And then take the top part off and just bar the 7th fret there on the A, D, and G string, right? And hit that and let it ring. And you hear that noticeable, like, kind of off sound there. E5. And then and go right back to that riff. And do it again. After that, go to a big C5 there and let it ring. D5 right there, let it ring. And then do it all again. Definitely one of those songs where you can hear like the fascination with power chords, just letting them ring and those kind of off sounds. I mean, that's early hard rock and heavy metal in action right there. Next up's the riff from the song I Want to Be Free from the album Look at Yourself. And once again, there's this power chord, kind of ringing chord fascination with this riff. It also reminds me of AC/DC, but keep in mind, Look at Yourself came out in 1971, so this is technically before AC/DC. But check this out. Basic stuff, nothing hard. It's just really cool to hear like this kind of early version of riffs like that. You know, an A5 to a G major to a D5. And notice like that partial G major down there, it has this edgy kind of sound with distortion, like that. And then end with this E, A, E at the end. And that's an AC AC/DC riff just waiting to happen right there, but it's technically Uriah Heep. Next up's the song Love Machine from the album Look at Yourself, and this rocks out like this. Something like that. So it starts with a single note kind of blurry legato thing. And you're just rolling like that C, B flat to G, and then ending on that higher E flat, and then do that same, C, B flat to G, and then end on that B flat like that. So there's like an alternating ending note. Like that. Do it again. Now do the first half the same, and then hop over here and do, right, and you're kind of walking back into that C right there. So that's like that opening kind of single note riff that's busy, and then you hear this kind of boogie woogie, like a C5 to an E flat 5, C5 to a B flat 5, like that. And then move down a set of strings and do the same thing, but now start in G, like that G to B flat 5, and then that G to F, right? And that last time right there, you've got this kind of like G blues scale riff right there. And you just hang out on that C for a while. That's why I was looking at my imaginary watch. And then it goes right back into that riff again. Rock out moment right there from Uriah Heep. Next up's the song Traveler in Time from the album Demons and Wizards, which is on the wall right there. I've got a copy of that album too. Roger Dean artwork on the cover. That's an essential album. You should have a copy of that laying around somewhere too. But Traveler in Time, something like this. Starts with, once again, with a single note riff right there. We're kind of playing with that E and D and then end up on that single G note. Like that. And then check this out. D major, D sus4, D major. That's way before Van Halen, but there's, Eddie's sus4 move right there. And then end up on that A5 down there. And then do it again. Start, right? It gets kind of quieter, and right there in E minor 7, kind of strummed. And then D major, D sus4 to A major. And then he's doing this kind of pull off right there, pulling off that D note and then that B to that A. Like that. Like that. start driving this G to A to a D power chord. Traveler in Time, that's a classic right there. Next up is the song Crime of Passion. This is a B-side from the album Firefly. So it's not on the original album, version, but I think a later kind of an extended, release of that album includes the song, because it was just a B-side, but I included this because it's really cool, like this. Something like that. So I kind of condensed everything together there. And it starts with this really cool riff in A. It's kind of super funky too. Like that. So I really dig this because you're basically doing like partial, double stops, single notes, but it's spelling out basically A minor, right? But you're doing this, like 7th fret, double stop there on the G and the B string with some vibrato, and then a 5th fret double stop, a single A right there on the D string, a single E, or I'm sorry, a single A on the low E string, and then you slide that A off like that. Right? So it's like 4 things that kind of make up that riff. And it's just kind of cool the way it's pieced together. It's really unusual. And then you do it again. Do it again. And there's like some scratches in there. I forgot about the scratches. Right there, do that shaky, 7th fret double stop, and then just, 2 A5s, 2 C5s, 2 D5s, and then 4 E's. Right? And it does all that again. Back to those chords again. And there's a change right here. You're basically hearing one guitar. I was using the MXR clone looper to help me out there. One guitar is basically just banging out power chords. B to an A, E over G sharp right there, and then G5 to F sharp 5. That's what I was looping with the MXR clone looper, and then the other guitar is playing this. It's like that low B note, that D to C sharp, A to B right there. And then last time it's implied, B harmonic minor, because you're coming down that B, D to C sharp, and then that B note to A sharp. Right? And that's setting up over that F sharp, power chord. So you put that together, that's really cool there. Out. That's really cool. Okay, last but not least is the song Wake Up, Set Your Sights, and we're back on the very Evie album, the first Uriah Heep album. And honestly, I'd never heard that album until I started putting this lesson together and kind of doing some of the research and stuff. And it blew me away. It's very different than most of Uriah Heep's albums. It's almost proggy at times, which I'm a huge progressive rock fan. So leave it to me to pick like the weird song from the weird Uriah Heep album. I guess that makes me weird. But this is cool, like this. of strange, really. And the first part, like this kind of random, like scale kind of workout right here. That's really cool. It's like a little part of F minor, a little part of G minor, a little part of A flat major, a little part of B flat minor. And that's kind of where I put it down there. So there's that little part of F minor, a little part of G. You know, G minor right there, B flat, A flat major right here. And then B flat minor right there. So that's just weird, right? They don't make music like this anymore, like that. Right, the whole band's just rocking out during that part. Then there's a noticeable change right there. And you hear that. So you hear him definitely go to the rhythm or neck pickup right there. And it's just an F minor 7 like that. And he lets that ring. And then you hear this. And it just sounds like an alarm, right? Or like a, you know, kind of a signal or whatever. And the first lyric that he sings is wake up. So I don't know if that was intentional, but it does sound like an alarm clock, kind of like that. And it's just the top part of that F sharp minor 7. Do that over and over. Then this kind of 70s inversion, like that little part of B flat major right there, and strum it the same way. Then right there, C minor. And then D flat major right there. Then start it again, that little part of F sharp minor up there. C minor, B flat minor, and then this unexpected twist, it goes to F major at the end right there. So the way it kind of modulates and mutates its way back to F major, because we did have F minor 7 at the beginning, right? So noticeably minor. And then after all that chord kind of business, then it ends up on F major, which is definitely unexpected. And like I said, they just don't write songs like that anymore. And I love weird kind of random stuff like that. It's really cool. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of Uriah Heep. And I want to thank the viewers out there that requested, you know, this band, because I was familiar with Uriah Heep. I used to play in a cover band and we used to do Stealin', and that was like decades ago. And, you know, Easy Livin' and some of the songs I was familiar with. But then when I really thought about it and I started kind of checking out their music, and it was like, oh, I didn't know they were kind of progressive in the beginning. And, I mean, they did change over the course of their history. But there's nothing like 70s Uriah Heep, like those early years and days of hard rock and metal, you know, pioneering sounds and riffs and stuff. And like I said, they were very prolific. So Mick Box was whipping out all sorts of riffs and solos and some really interesting, you know, chances, you know, musical chances being taken. Really cool stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.